Welcome to Late for Practice. I'm your host, Will. Today, I'm joined by Coach Jeff Russell of the White River Rugby Club. How you doing, Jeff?
Doing well. How are you, Will?
Good, good, man. Tell me, I have no idea about Whitefish Rugby Club. I have no idea about anything that you guys have going out there in Indiana. Tell me all
Yeah,
about it, man. I want to know. Educate
sure.
me.
Yeah, happy to. So White River Rugby, the White River Men's Rugby Club was founded in 1999. I've only just been recently introduced to the team. Started playing with those guys back in 2019. And I played with them for really 3 games, and then the practices leading up to that competitive season before I had a neck injury that made it to where I couldn't play rugby anymore. And White River, like many amateur teams, at least in my neck of the woods, we didn't have a coach, didn't have a lot of structure. It was just guys, getting together and doing the best they could to um, help grow the sport and just have the fun that everybody um, at the amateur rugby level just enjoys having. But to that end, we weren't very good. And um, when when I was taken out of the game from a playing standpoint, I volunteered to be a coach, and man, it's going well. So we were bringing, let's call it 10 players on average out to sessions, and scrambling to find old boys and stuff to fill out the numbers to uh, have a proper match and not just forfeit it. And now we're averaging 35, 40 guys per session. We're looking at building another team, a D4 team. We're at D3 right now, looking to bump up to D2 eventually, probably be a few years in the future. But yeah, man, it's going well.
Tell me what the goal is behind White River, and
Yeah.
what you guys envision to see for the future for yourselves.
So I'm the head coach of the White River Rugby Club, but I'm the founder of the Dead Fish Society. So the Dead Fish is our mascot, right? And the Dead Fish Society is modeled after. I'm sure you're familiar with like a booster club, like a group of old boys that can support the men's club or the women's club from financial standpoint, recruiting, administration, whatever. So that was the idea behind the Dead Fish Society, and it was most closely modeled after Fort Wayne. Fort Wayne, Indiana has this amazing rugby program, and they have the Black and Blue Society, which is functionally the same. So the Dead Fish Society is our main goal is to grow the sport of rugby in central Indiana. That's our main goal. We have a secondary goal of giving back to the community just because, as you know, there's all sorts of different folks that get drawn to the sport, different uh, professions and financial means and so forth. And if we can get those people together and focus them on doing some good in the community, I think we can do some pretty amazing stuff. So our secondary goal then is to just give back to the community, local philanthropies. The DFS in October is going to be doing just like a ruck run fundraiser. We'll just do a little 5K ruck run, and we're going to be giving back to the Indie Warrior Project. The proceeds will go to the Indie Warrior Project. So just little stuff like that, doing what we can locally. But the main goal is to grow the sport. And the main ways we're doing that right now, we've run a couple of skills clinics, just basic. We're not charging anything for them. We may in the future just to help with the fundraising, but right now it's just bringing all of the rugby expertise that we've drawn into the White River Rugby Club. And we just
Hmm.
ask guys, hey, can you give a 30-minute clinic on basic rucking, introduction to rucking? So pretty amateur stuff, just introducing. We're keeping it above 18 right now, just to avoid all the liabilities and all that kind of stuff. But eventually want to start running some clinics at the youth level and so forth. Um, we also want to look at, in terms of growing the sport, we want to look at helping start rugby clubs at the amateur level, at the grassroots level in central Indiana. One of the problems we have, I think, is, we have unions. Um, we have Rugby Indiana, which is the governing body for the youth rugby sports, and through no fault of Rugby Indiana's, they are there to ensure compliance with the rules. But what I think a lot of governing bodies um, miss out on is how to actually help develop clubs. The club development process, in my experience over the last 20 years doing this, is always an individual who um, has the motivation and maybe the means to help start a club. But besides giving a bag of balls and a one pager that says, here are the rules that you need to follow, there's not a lot of assistance there.
Mm.
And I think the DFS can help with that. We have a kind of a package deal that says, here's what you got to start with. Here's the next step. Here's what you should expect for your first year. Here's what you should expect 3 years in. Here are some benchmarks marks that you should be hitting. And to that end, I think it would help teams avoid some of the most common pitfalls. After the pandemic, a lot of teams at the high school level folded. And some have been resurrected, but some haven't. And I think that's the first major project we want to tackle with the DFS is getting those teams that did fold back up again and providing whatever resources we need to do it. The men's club, we go to the sessions, we train hard, we're taking a run at the conference, our D3 conference, and that's all going to be great. But true north is grow the sport. And it's my opinion that the score will take care of itself, so long as you can employ the inspiration needed to just do what's best for the organization and grow the sport.
What is the DFS doing to help mitigate or help proliferate some of those high school teams to come back?
Yeah, so we are so new just because, like I said, I was playing in 2019, then the pandemic, then my injury. So I've only been coaching White River and getting these things going over the last 2 years. So DFS was founded this year.
So it's brand spanking new.
Spanking new. And but just to give you a little bit of background on myself. So 2003 is when I started playing rugby, a little town called Zionsville, Indiana. It's just north of Indianapolis. And I wasn't good at any other sports. So I think there's a lot of individuals like me who maybe couldn't fit the mold in traditional youth sports, found a bit of a home with rugby, and the rest is history, right? But we started that team in 2003, and we were terrible, right? And we did all wrong things that, again, I think if somebody could just put some best practices together, we could avoid in the future. But road runs before every session, and not a cohesive, comprehensive communication style, not putting together what our code of conduct should be, just some basic stuff, I think would have given us some better guidance. And that's no knock on the coaches at the time, because they were just figuring it out just like the rest of us were. But we were garbage, right? Junior year, garbage. Senior year, we started getting okay. We ended up going to state, but we still struggled. And it wasn't until I went on to college, but it wasn't until almost 10 years later that we really started gaining some traction with that program. So then I go on to college in 2004, and I found a rugby club there at the University of Southern Indiana. And the guy that was running it was graduating, and he was like, here are the keys. And so as the player coach, having played 3 seasons of rugby, and I didn't know what I was doing, so I just did what I was taught 3 seasons ago, and a lot of that was wrong stuff, right? For 3 years of my, well, ended up being a 5 year stint in college because I'm dumb. Um, it was struggling for numbers, all the same things you always hear with amateur rugby clubs. Um, and it wasn't until we got a head coach. His name was Kurt Morrell, really good dude, that we started leveling up. And I graduated, but then USI had a good run at nationals for after a couple years after I left there. And so I started learning some little nuggets of good stuff and realizing how much better I could be as a player and how much better programs could be. Then the next club I went to was the Louisville Men's Club. And yeah, I graduated college, I got a job moved me to Louisville. And that's really where I learned the bulk of what doesn't work and what does. Louisville was also struggling at the time, but it was kind of they were on their way out of the little rut they were in. And this guy, Joe Parrish, was the president there. And he did just some basic stuff that I thought was really good in growing the club. The first thing he did was he talked to the guys as a team 2 to 3 times a week, whether we had anything going on or not. And that's including the off season. And I think at the grassroots level, that's paramount. You have to beat the drum. You got to stay in front of everybody. And, he would find excuses. And one of the things he did was just when it was somebody's birthday, he would get on Facebook and tell them happy birthday and have a little blurb about the player, made the player feel good. Players told his buddies. And then the next season, we would have one more guy come out because he would, the players are your recruiting pool, right? Sign up tables
Yeah.
and stuff like that really work. It's the players that recruit. It's the players that grow the sport fundamentally. They also found a really good coach, George Davies, and he showed me a ton about playing. I'd always been a wing forward, but then I got fat, and he put me at prop and showed me a lot of great things at prop, and I ended up doing pretty good. 2018, we had a really good run. We went undefeated. Um, uh, Grand Rapids, Michigan kicked our teeth in the second game of the tournament. We were in for playoffs, but we could see how good it could get, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. That
So
inkling starts getting there. Yeah.
yeah, right. And again, just all these best practices that we learned. Now on the professional side, um, I had developed my career as a manager and learned a thing or two about managing people. And one of the tenets that I'd learned is that you have to tell somebody something 7 times before they actually hear it once. And I think that's definitely true with amateur rugby, right? If you're trying to bring a bunch of rugby dummies together towards a common goal, you have to repeat yourself and repeat yourself and repeat yourself because they're just, that's just what it takes. It's just what it takes when you're herding cats, right? So anyway, so I spent the better part of 2 decades learning what not to do and then getting a glimpse on just how much better it could be if you followed some basic rules. And then after my injury, I started employing those rules with White River, and we just exploded. And it's just basic stuff like that. I can go through some of it, or I can send you my coaching philosophy. But
What would be like 5 of the most simple rules that you think that if you're starting out, you absolutely have to follow?
yeah, rule number one above everything else is you have to be totally positive, especially year one. If you're trying to grow a program, you have to be totally positive. And what positive means to me in this context is the opposite of do you have what it takes to be a part of our program, right? So there's a bit of elitism that can seep into a program after they've won a few playoff matches or just whatever their benchmark is. Then the numbers grow and they start getting this. Well, do you have what it takes to play for us or not? I think if you're building a program and you're wanting to grow the sport, everyone is welcome, and that means that you have to you have to cater your communication around staying positive, even to those who may not be that good at the sport. So what that can look like in context is, let's say you're starting out practice one, your team's in a rut, and you have 9 guys showing up to practice. The number one mistake that I see coaches and team leaders make is before or after practice, they go, "Where is everybody?" Well, you're chastising the wrong people. Like, you need to be holding on to them. You need to be appreciating those guys because they showed up. And whatever the situation is with your program, your numbers aren't good. So they showed up in spite of the fact they probably didn't want to. So I would say that positivity is, guys, you are my core group. I love you all. This is amazing. We're going to have a great session. And the only thing I ask from you, if you have fun in this session, is bring your buddy out next time. So spring season, when I first started coaching, and I got the salt from Joe Parrish from Louisville. We had 7 guys at first practice. We employed that positivity. It was just fun games, right? Nobody had any delusions that we were going to win that season, right? Or go anything past regular conference season. So, it just, I would get online. I got rugby books and we would just have fun games, and I kept it totally positive and fun. And then at the end of the practice, I would say, "Did you have fun?" Yeah. It's a lot of fun, coach. Yep. Doing good stuff. Okay. Tell your buddies. Let's get 2 more guys out. And that's what would happen is we would average 1 or 2 new players every week. So by the time we had our first match, after a month and a half of sessions, we had 15 aside. And that was in spite of, there were still some legacy players in there that, they're like, "Coach, I've been a part of this program for a long time. These guys might be coming out at the beginning, but everybody's going to fall off." And I would just respectfully disagree. And then you just have to not let that bring you down. So positivity. I think the second thing is, and this is a coaching tenet, is show, don't tell. I think one of the biggest pitfalls that we have at the amateur rugby level is you have coaches who are good players, or coaches who understand and appreciate the rugby theory and all the different little intricacies that can happen, especially in the breakdown and things like that. And what happens is, you're doing a drill. One out of your, let's say you got 20 guys coming out to practice now. 1 out of your 20 guys isn't quite doing it right, or maybe 3 guys aren't doing it right. So you stop the whole drill, you stop the whole team, and you explain why. Okay, you can't leave your feet here because of that reason, et cetera, et cetera. Well, all the rest of those guys are just standing around.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And you become this monologuist. And again, you're not keeping players by doing that. You have to show, don't tell. So I think the way that looks is, when you're doing a drill, you find some guys that can demo the motion that you're wanting to teach in that little segment of your session. And you have them demo it. You ask feedback from the players. You have any questions, you have them demo it again. You ask feedback one more time, and then you demo it again. It may seem a little redundant, but that takes 3 minutes tops. And then you go, "Okay, let's do the drill." And that maximizes the amount of time players have holding a rugby ball and doing those motions, instead of standing around listening to you monologue at them.
Your third rule was delegate to those that you can trust. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so I think that finding those individuals to whom you can delegate will be a quantum, like, it'll cause a quantum leap in your growth, your retention, your money, right? You need help, you need players, you need money, and then you need help. And it's kind of like a cyclical thing, and they all kind of feed on each other. So to get that started, I think you need 5 positions. You need 5 offices in a organization. And I'm sure there's different ways to structure it. I'm sure there's plenty of people out there who will disagree, but this is what worked for me. So you have a president, you have a head coach, you have a match secretary, you have a social secretary, and you have a treasurer. And I think what organizations tend to find is there's 1 to 3 people that actually do most of the things, and that's fine. That's why you recruit 5, because people have weddings, or somebody's going to have a kid, and so they're out of it for a season. So you have 5 people to functionally have 3 people doing the things, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So the social secretary, I mean, everybody knows what kind of I think a president and a head coach do. Match secretary is fairly straightforward. The social secretary, I think, is a really clutch position, especially again at the amateur level. So it's organizing the socials afterwards, but it's also being the social face of the team, so the community facing person. So you get a person who's fairly extroverted, who enjoys talking to folks. The social player, the guy that's maybe not all that good, or he's not good anymore, but he loves having the beers after the match, and he knows everybody, right? Like every team's got that guy. It's been around for a minute. That's your social secretary. And if you document it and you say, here are your set of responsibilities, now go and find whoever you want to help you do those things. Again, that's just one less thing you have to do as the program head, whether it's the head coach or the president. So that guy can do, I think one key thing, especially now, is that guy or gal is the in charge of the social media. And just like I think you should touch on your players 2 to 3 times per week on just whatever positive message you want to put out there, you should be doing the same thing on social media marketing. And if you don't have any content, then just share a meme. Like, it doesn't have to be anything super professional looking, but just put it out there, put it out there, put it out there. So that's that key structure. I think that it's difficult to have that day one, but I think after you take that Ted Lasso style of coaching, you keep that up for a season, people start seeing some improvement, then you ask for people to assume those 5 positions. But you got to be, the main thing is, especially with groups of volunteers, is you have to be organized about it. So you have to have this documented. You have to have it printed out that you hand people, and you have to have one-on-one conversations with them saying, I want you to be my treasurer. Here are the key functions of it. Yes, it's handling the taxes. Yes, it's looking at the budget, but it's also finding some people who can fundraise for us. And by the way, here's the documented sponsorship form that has 5 tiers of sponsorships. Now let's put a contest together and say, okay, the first player that gets $500 in sponsorships has his dues waived for the year, whatever, however you wanted to do it, So I could go on and on and on about the key 5, but starting with that key 5.
How do people typically find you guys? Is it just through player-to-player contact? If somebody's out there that has played that doesn't know where to start, where do you recommend them to actually take a look? Is there a governing league that kind of takes care of all these D2, D3 teams? Is there something out there that kind of can give you a heads up of oh yeah, if you live in this kind of area, then you should apply with one of these teams or see if these teams need players?
Yeah, excellent question. And the answer is it absolutely is not structured that way. I think that's one of the problems we have at the grassroots level. So there is an essential spot that says, on paper there is. You have the Midwest Rugby Union, you've got the Indiana Rugby Union in my case, you got Rugby Indiana at the youth level. But if you go on their websites, I think you'll find that they're not updated on a regular enough basis for you to really get any information. These unions have to rely on the teams to update the information, right? So you have a guy that's the main contact for a team, and then come to find out he dipped and he absconded with the $400 or $500 that was in the bank account for the team, and that was 2 years ago, and you still got his name and email on the Midwest Rugby Union website, because who's going to think to update them? So it functionally doesn't jive right now. I think as the sport continues to grow, you'll see that get better and better. But I think the best way for an individual to find a rugby team, well, before I say that, if you were to move to Indiana and you hadn't talked to me and
Hmm.
you wanted to reach out to a local rugby club, what would you do?
Google would probably be my
You
first
Google it,
assumption. Yeah,
right?
yeah,
You Google it.
yeah.
You and everybody else. So I think my recommendation then to an amateur rugby organization trying to grow their numbers is you got to be at the top of that organic click on Google. This is marketing 101, right? But you don't have the budget to do pay per clicks or any of that stuff. So that means you got to get an online presence. So what does that mean? That means 2 to 3 pieces of content on social media every single week, right?
Hmm.
Creating a website in whatever basic. I mean, we just have a Squarespace website, and it's horrible, but it's updated. Yeah, almost always we have the whiteriverrugby.com website on those. Well, Google sees that through whatever. I don't know how that all works. I don't care. Just so long as we're at the top. And about once a week, I get on Google and I put in Rugby Indiana, Rugby Indianapolis, and I see where we are. And if I see that we're kind of falling down a little bit, it's time to up our stuff.
Because it's not only just marketing yourself to the world, but it's also marketing yourself to future players and all those kinds of things. I just think it's really hard for a lot of people, and I think that you're doing a really great job. I'm in Utah and I found you guys. Like I wasn't looking for you, I found you. So I think that you're doing a good job. I just think that there's a lot of other unions out there or rugby teams out there that just don't have the time or energy or anything like that. And so it's super hard to I like for people in a situation of they want to play but they just don't know where to go. I think that's really difficult. But I think that what you're doing is exactly right. So I do appreciate that answer. So
Yeah, and I agree with you. It is hard, and lots of times that club president, it's a difficult, thankless gig, right? But I think mixed in with those is um, it's really easy to fall in these pitfalls, right? You don't run sessions right. You don't have the kind of culture that you need. You don't have any structure behind what you're doing. And so you feel like you're spinning your wheels because you're making the same mistakes that every other amateur program that's trying to start up or reinvent themselves is doing all over the country.
mm,
So I think one of the biggest things we need, and this is a standing invitation for anybody, you're welcome to put my email out there when you post this. I would be thrilled to sit down with anybody that wants any um, just okay, how do I get started? Got a little package I can send out. You can have it, right?
mm.
Because again, I'm just about growing the sport. And I think just avoiding those basic pitfalls, I think it's going to help grow a lot of programs.
Who do you guys play through your league?
So it's local D3 teams that are within 2 or 3 hours of us, right? So we got
Mm,
Louisville, Lexington, Cincinnati Wolfhounds, Dayton, um, Cincinnati Kills. There's a lot of team in Ohio, a lot of teams in Ohio. Um, is that it? Yeah, because the Columbus Rhinos went down to D4. So yeah, those key 5 teams.
mm.
So and that's just in our competitive conference. So that's the Midwest D3 Conference Southern League, and then we're organized in different leagues. So there's actually some teams in Northern Indiana that just play on a different league, and then we would play each other in playoffs if we get that far.
It's interesting. And I typically would assume it's like a Saturday afternoon, Saturday morning kind of league.
1 o'clock kickoff almost always. So so yeah, as far as the D3 Conference Southern League in my little area, um, the I think that the league in general is definitely improving. I think the main one of the biggest reasons is we're far enough out of the pandemic that people are coming out. But I also think that the there's this general elevation of just the game in general. There's higher rugby IQ. People are starting to understand concepts that just weren't common knowledge even 2, 3, 5 years ago on the pitch. And I think that's making it more attractive for people. And then I think we also have players who played at the youth level, having gone to high school and college, and now are entering the men's and women's senior club. Who, there's you just statistically aren't all, not all players are going to go to the MLR, right? The evidence I see is just numbers, right? So Rivers got, I think this fall season we have, we have over 100 people actually rostered coming out intermittently, but I have 45 registered players, so way more than 23 aside, right?
Yeah.
And compare that to last year, we had 20, and then the year before that, we were just basically forfeiting games. Our D2 team, with whom we do some joint practices, the Indianapolis Impalas, they have two either former or current MLR players that are just out of season that play on that men's club. And then they have at least one former U.S. player that plays with them. And they're seeing a massive uptick in their numbers as well. I think they've got 35, 40 guys coming out to sessions as well. Whereas I would say this time last year, they were having 20 or so. So something's happened that the grassroots has definitely increased for sure.
Yeah, I mean, my every time that I see an MLR team or a new somebody going to make a new team in a new state, I think, wow, it'll be interesting to see how that affects grassroots, and because you can actually like see it and go to it, and how exciting it is for kids to actually like look at and watch. So
Yeah, I agree. And to that end, I would say, if you were gonna go into a community that didn't have any rugby or very little, where would you start with growing the sport, do you think?
um it would probably be like a college team. If I was trying to grow a team at a grassroots level, I think I would try and affiliate myself with a college team that may have a local club, and then see if we could show the kids or show it. My mindset's totally different because I coach first and second grade football. And so
Mm,
the idea for me is, well, I want my kids to go see football played at a really high level. And then
yeah,
once they see it played at a high level, well, then they know, oh, this is what I'm trying to accomplish, or this is the goal that I have set in mind. I'm going to a college team and showing them a really good college team and saying this is what rugby should look like it being played at this level.
yeah,
So,
yeah. I agree with you in part. So I think the notion of a top end pull through
mm,
at the grassroots level, I think is 100% correct. I think if it's difficult to have a youth, if you're going to have a league of teams or even just starting a youth team, not having an example for the youth players to see is difficult. I'm not sure I agree with the college bit, and here's why.
okay.
So here's what I hear, especially in Central Indiana. Um, I would say 90% of my fellow coaches in the surrounding little demographic area there would say that to grassroots grow the sport, you got to start at the youth level. I think the youth level is important, but I think you start at the senior club. And here's why. I think if you start a senior club team, and you employ some of the basic tenets, particularly emphasizing that positivity piece, which is just going to make it more magnetic for people to join the organization. Um, those people then become inspired to start their own teams. So
Mm,
you have, and this has happened with White River. We now have. I've got a coach that's gone on. He was fresh out of college, um, inspired to help grow the sport, and now he's a youth coach Jack Broadhacker, a really good kid. And um, so through no effort of mine, other than doing what I'm doing with the club, Jack is now taking some of those same tenets and doing that at the youth level at
Mm,
this little youth team, Carmel High School or Carmel Youth rugby team. Same thing with we have this really talented player, South African guy, Quentin Kretzman, and he played and coached at a really high level in South Africa. Moved here with his wife, and the local college team, IUPUI, was in between coaches. They had a really good coach that moved back to Australia. So because of this magnetism that the men's club has brought these people together, he's now helping IUPUI. And so I think you'll see that happen. So I think it starts with the senior club. Um, Fort Wayne, Indiana, there's nobody I can think of that's doing this better in our area than Fort Wayne with the Black and Blue Society and then their senior club. And they've their youth programs, the clinics they put on, I think it shows that really well. The Cincinnati Wolfhounds is another one. If the Cincinnati Wolfhounds folded, all the rugby in that community would totally, let's say something catastrophic happened to the players. Um, all the rugby in their community would suffer because of that.
mm,
So
mm.
I think that's the model you should look for if you're wanting to grow the sport. Start at the senior club.
With rugby being the way that it is right now, a lot of it is club. And so it's not necessarily associated with high school
Oh,
sports or high school. Yeah. So like, do you think that that's going to stay the same where it's still going to be everybody's going to be in club sports, or do you think that rugby eventually will work its way into the high schools and be a high school sponsored sport?
I think that totally depends on the popularity and the money that the sport is able to elicit.
Mm,
Um, I think that's up to the ISHAA. I can tell you, I coached I coached the Zionsville High School team for a minute, and we were as close to school affiliated as we've ever been, we were as close to school affiliated as any other high school club that I had helped develop. Other than that, it had always been club outside. You don't have any access to school resources, no buses, no trainers, no nothing. Zionsville had that, but they were in this weird spot where they were beholden to all of the ISHA regulations without any of the school, I shouldn't say any, without much of the school resources that the other ISHA sports were benefiting from. Um, and so it increased regulation without without taking into account sport growth.
mm,
So the teams that do achieve it, I don't think it tends to go well, at least from my personal experience. There may be teams out there that have found a way around it. The most successful rugby programs I've seen are community based. So you take you go by county instead of by high school. So this is another program that I want to resurrect for no other reason than their name. So it was Hamilton County and Boone County, and it was a little sevens league that some buddies of mine put together, and it was called the Hambone Rugby,
it's
right?
funny.
It's dope.
Yeah.
So, but that community base helps massively from a recruiting standpoint because now you can pull athletes who are otherwise great athletes, but maybe not the top at their given sport, especially wrestlers. I think wrestlers are really good. There's good transfer there.
Mm,
Wrestlers, hockey players. So, and now you can so your recruiting pool is massively increased. So I think community based is probably how that will go again, it's up to the ISHAA if they want to invest in it, but I think if we want to grow the sport, we can't wait on that.
Yeah.
So, no, I think club is where it's going to be. And what's good about from an MLR standpoint is, I know there's some structure behind it, and to be totally honest, a lot of that stuff I'm ignorant to, just because I've spent my whole time in rugby at the Bush League amateur level.
Mm.
But I have a mentor who's an MLR coach, and then I guess I rub elbows with some folks that have played at the higher level, and every story I hear about how players tap into that, even listening to some of your podcasts, is you know somebody, you have a conversation, you talk to a scout, and you get a tryout, and here you are, right? So I think there's some etched in trails, but there's all kinds of unconventional ways to tap into that MLR piece. And like Quentin Kretzman, it's a good example. This guy is from overseas. He just Googled us and found us and started going to training with us. That guy, he's on the tail end of I would say the nominal age group to play professionally, but he absolutely could play MLR, right? And he recently went to um, uh, it's called the Midwest Thunderbirds. It's like the select team from all the local clubs around there. There's some really, really good players on that team. And then I think, the Chicago Hounds and some other, and I'm getting outside of my realm of expertise here, so I won't speak too much on it. But what I've been able to infer is that you at least have a path to MLR if you're playing along with those more elite type players.
Mm.
So my point is even this guy that plays on a D3 like rec league style team, I don't think it's very common, but I do think there's still a path there to play at some next level stuff.
Well, and I think that each MLR team needs to really focus on their pathway program, especially because of the way that we are, or the way that rugby's played at a club facility. The college rugby shield is awesome and it's fantastic, and I think pulling players from those are fantastic. But I also think because you're kind of coming in at a weird angle, that it also needs to be looked at with D3, D2, all these kinds of players to see what the talent pool really is
Yeah.
stateside. So it, it we're we're always going to need more pathway programs to be put into place. I think Utah's really good at doing pathway programs. They have their Utah pathway thing, and then they have something called Crossroads Cup where they just invite anybody to play into one of the four teams, and then they play each other, and all
Yeah.
the Warriors are out there scoping out who they think would work in the system or who wouldn't work in a system. And so I do think that more MLR teams need to look at doing more of those kinds of creative pathway programs, because I just don't think college is going to offer up as much talent as we could be looking at, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Well, do you think too so you said you have like four teams, like feeder teams basically for the Warriors?
Yeah, so they have four teams and they all play within like, oh man, one team is this section of the city, and they're just different parts of the valley essentially. But then once they all play, well, then you can get picked up to go to the selects for the Warrior Selects program, and then they
Right.
pull from the Warrior Selects to then go play for the Utah Warriors.
So are those four teams run by the same director? Is that like the same
Yeah.
board?
Yeah, so the commissioner of the Crossroads Cup, his name is Saya Uhila, and he actually plays flanker or lock for the Warriors.
Let's see.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's a bit weird. It's a bit different, but I think that a lot of teams, if we want to grow our sport the way that we're looking at it, we have to take a really good look at those club teams. And I
Yeah.
think that just by focusing on college, we've overlooked a lot of club teams. So I find your role very interesting as well, just because if I was in Chicago, or if I was in New England, I would be looking at those kinds of feeder teams as well and saying, hey, who's on D2, who's on D3, because I can't I only have so many foreign or overseas spots that I can fill on my team of 23.
Right. And that was interesting. What's the name of the guy that you just got done? You just posted. Um, I'm spacing on his name. I was watching it right before we got on here. Anyway, it doesn't
Oh,
matter.
no, you're totally fine. Greg Cooper or Niall Saunders had a problem with his slots. So, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but no, somebody had mentioned like to grow the sport, you have to recruit from overseas. That was the thing that he said,
Mm,
and I think that that's true for now. But I think if we really want, this is my humble opinion as a bush league amateur rugby coach, is which doesn't mean much, is that um, at some point it's got to be homegrown players, or at least the
yeah.
majority of homegrown players. If you want this to be sustainable over several generations, you got to have the players from your local communities at least know that there's a clear shot at playing for that pro team. So um, I think something that Indianapolis or Central Indiana rather is missing. So we have a D2 side, which they've played and beaten D1 sides. So they're a really really good side, and and then D3, that's White River. So it's Indianapolis and Paul is D2, D3 White River, D4 the West Side Outcasts. And we all have these, we're in these separate silos, right? So I'm doing River, Evan Roberts and Michael Temple are doing D2, and Joey, I'm spacing on his last name, he's doing the D4 side. And I think if we're not proper feeder teams, but Indianapolis is trying to get a professional team here with SOK Global. I don't know if you talked to any of the guys. Will McGee is the main guy there. I can get you in contact with him if you want.
Yeah, I'd love to.
So we have a little stadium that was a soccer stadium for a while, and they want to renovate it. They've got a grant from um, the local government there to renovate Coons Stadium and turn it into a spot where we could have a professional team train. And they're interested in that grassroots. I think your recruiting pool is going to be those, at least initially, if you wanted any homegrown rugby players that you're not recruiting from elsewhere in the country or from overseas. It's got to come from it'll come mainly from the Impalas, just because they have already got some pro level players that participate in that club. But that's your pool, right? Maybe IPY, IU, some of those programs. But I think um, that requires a governing board, Central Indiana Senior Club governing board that that keeps us all talking the same language. And I think you'll find, again, if you start up top, or at least at the club level up top, then those people that are involved in those programs, when they go out and coach their youth teams, they'll be using that same language. And I'm talking specifically just like structure. Like, what kind of structure are we going to run? Almost all of the teams around here do a 1-3-3-1, right? Or 2-4-2 or a 1-3-2-2, whatever it is. I don't think it matters which structure we choose or what kind of pattern we're running. I think it matters more that we pick one and we stick with it and we get really good at it, and everybody is speaking that same language. And I think long term, once we do, I mean, demographically, Indianapolis is going to get an MLR team eventually, whether it's from SOK Global or elsewhere. We should be running the same kind of general strategy that MLR team is.
Yeah.
That'll just streamline that pathway.
Yeah.
We should be calling whatever, I call it the break the glass ruck, first ruck when somebody goes down. I call that break the glass, and I got that from Luke Gross, who's the head coach of IU. That should just be called the same thing,
Yeah.
right? So, and I think that's a little, maybe one could say like a nitpicky thing, but I bet you find the the communities that have uh, the communities that have the most successful professional programs, you'll find that their surrounding communities have that in some form. They all kind of speak the same language.
I'd be interested to see, like, New England just won this year. I'd be interested to see what their pathway programs actually look like. I think a lot of MLR teams right now have a tendency to buy out more of their top talent from overseas at this
Mm.
point. But you're right. You're absolutely right. There's going to be a point where it's going to need to change, and I see hope for that with guys like Sam Gala, who just who just went on from he was playing in Colorado to then UCLA, and now he's playing for the Jackals, and now he's playing overseas at the test matches for USA Rugby.
Yeah,
He's obviously growing his game rather quickly, and he's one of the guys that I found interesting was not the first guy that, oh, I went overseas and that's how I got my game up so much higher than what it was. Um, he grew that all here, all locally, all domestically, and that's a huge component to growing the game in North America. So,
yeah. Bryce Campbell was a rugby Indiana native, and he ended up playing for USA.
mm,
Um, I think he would have a similar story to Sam's.
yeah.
I don't know him all that well, so he may disagree with that. But
No, it'd just be interesting to see because it we're getting there's going to be a tipping point here soon where I think that a lot of people are, I don't want to say disillusioned with football. I mean, I'm coaching football. My kids love football right now, but I think that
sure,
there's a lot of like, I don't want to say risk management. I think that there's a lot more issues with socioeconomic problems with football that
yeah,
and culture problems with football that rugby just doesn't seem to have. And so if I was picking a sport for my kid today, I think it would probably be closer to rugby than it would be football at this point.
yeah, yeah. That I get what you mean. Just I think at the youth level, tapping into rugby, what do you need? You need some cleats, you need a mouth guard. It's not a lot there, right? You have two dues, and the more developed the program, the higher the dues you're going to get. I get all of that. But if you're playing football, just the equipment and everything alone, that's got to be close to $1,000 by now.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like 400 back when I was a kid. So,
Yeah. Yeah. So just
so
the rental on it alone is like $300.
that's
So
what I'm saying.
yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, it's tough for families to swing that,
Yeah.
especially stuff's getting tougher these days. And so, no, I agree with you. I think too, um, I think soccer and football specifically, baseball probably too. If you don't if you don't get on that track early, like pee wee football or middle school, you're not tapping into it in high school,
Hmm.
right? And so, well, kids develop differently at different stages in their lives, and sometimes you can get an absolute dog who just grew up his sophomore or junior year of high school. And so I think that's a great niche for rugby, is because you get these guys that otherwise didn't get that track because they developed a little bit later, guys or girls. Um, you know, lacrosse I think gets a little bit of that. Hockey finds some individuals like that, but I've drunk the Kool-Aid, so I'm going to say, oh,
I I was at the PLL event that was held here, the Premier League lacrosse event that was held here in Salt Lake. And there's just something different about rugby versus lacrosse. There's just something that grips you a little bit tighter and just a community that welcomes you a little bit more. I
yeah,
like it a lot. Yeah. So
yeah. That's I think out of everything there's a subculture of rugby players that I, I just don't think you find it anywhere else. So
let me ask you, Just why are you throwing so much of your life into developing essentially a rec league for these guys?
Yeah. Well, I don't want to spend too much time on my injury, but I think it ties in here. Um, so the injury I had in rugby was life threatening. Like I was paralyzed from the head down, but I recovered really quickly. I was in the ICU for a week, and then I was out of there. But when I didn't technically break my neck, but just for brevity's sake, when I broke my neck on the pitch, I thought that was it. Like I stopped breathing for a minute. Like I thought that was curtains. And uh, looking at the reaper in the eye will give you a perspective. And at the time, I realized that there were really three fundamental things that were important to me, and a lot of the other stuff I was focusing on wasn't so important. And although at the time rugby didn't come to mind, it was my wife and my family, and then um, I'll just say that there's you ever heard you ever heard the saying that there's no atheists in a foxhole?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I won't touch on that too much, but anyway, um, I did get this perspective that, as cliche as it sounds, life is short, and I was spending a lot of my free time. I was playing a little bit of rugby, but then other than that, it was it was stuff that was unproductive, right? You go home and you turn on the TV and what are you doing? And as I see it now, I'm kind of on borrowed time. I had the surgery to fix the instability in my neck, but I still can't feel hot or cold on the right side of my body. There's lingering spinal cord injury symptoms that I always have, and so I just feel like I'm on borrowed time, and I have a sense of urgency, and so I spend almost 100% of my free time. I'm an HVAC technician. Me and my father own a HVAC business together, and so I spend 40 to 50 hours a week doing that, and then I go straight over to the pitch, and I just work on that stuff because it makes me happy, and because I want I want to see this sport grow before I uh, shake hands with the Reaper again. So that's really what it is. As cliche as that sounds.
Oh,
Um, but to the other point, or the other reason, I guess, is that people ask me why, oh why would you want to bring people to this sport that almost took everything from you? And I would say my rebuttal to that is, first of all, I had a congenital defect in my vertebrae that made it unstable. So if you're gonna play rugby or any contact sport, I think you should spend the $800 and get an MRI of your spine. And I think of your spine specifically. I think that's an investment well worth it. Just to make sure, like, hey, am I physically eligible for this kind of rough sport?
can I do this? Yeah.
Yeah. And in my case, I wasn't. And so for 20 years of 2 seasons a year, I was just rolling the dice, and I finally rolled snake eyes, and I played in the type 5 for most of that time. So lots of tackles, lots of crashes. Um, so I would say, statistically speaking, I still ended up doing all right for 20 years and really only having one catastrophic injury. Um, but two, I think it just goes back to that culture. Like rugby is so magnetic, it's so inviting that even somebody who almost paid the ultimate price for it, like I still just love the sport so much, right? And um, at the amateur level, players they always say one more season. My rule is every amateur rugby player gets 5 retirements. When you say, like, okay, this is my last season, first time you say that, that's item one, or retirement one. And so you say that 3 or 4 more times, and usually the latter two are like, okay, I'm only going to play alumni games. And so I've got buddies that are pushing 70. They're still like in really good shape,
Yeah,
but
they're like, I still got it. I still can do this.
I can get in a B game. Like,
Yeah.
and two, also those guys that finally do hang up the boots or they're forced to, I think those rugby players, I don't mean to sound dramatic here, but those players go through a very real depression because you spend a time where your rugby club is your social outlet. It's your group of friends. It's it, it becomes kind of a part of your identity, at least for the ones that are really devoted to it. And then when you can't boot up anymore, like that really has a rough go on guys and girls. So I think too, I dove headfirst into coaching rugby because I wanted to avoid that. I wanted to avoid like just feeling worthless.
Yeah,
So
like it was up and it wasn't up to you. Like that would be super hard. I mean, you said it yourself. Everybody gets 5 retirement parties and you
yeah,
got 1 minute of, oh, I might not be able to do this anymore. So
yeah,
that's
yeah,
inspiring, man. That's um I think that all that we can leave it behind is our legacy. And so if
yeah,
your legacy is teaching people, that goes well beyond what most leave behind. So I commend you for that.